Companies often defend their actions by saying they are acting on behalf of their shareholders, they're maximizing profit.
We happen to have a team of 60 professionals that work on this full-time.
There's no reason to think that this is what shareholders want.
Fantastic discussion. I would love to have the video of this and show this to my students.
Investor democracy, a very important theme. Why is it important? I think because our democracies are under fire. We need new ways to let democracies work. And who can introduce us to this better than Oliver Hart? It's a big honor to have you here, winner of the Nobel Prize 2016 in economics.
About 60% of Americans invest in the stock market, many through their pensions, and this is increasingly true also for Europeans. Libraries are filled with books on how to manage your money, but I'm aware of no book that tells investors that their shares come with votes and that this gives them some power and also perhaps some responsibility to influence what companies do. Companies need to find out their shareholders' preferences, what kind of trade-offs they're willing to make. And so do the intermediaries through which most people hold shares and that vote and engage with companies on our behalf. How can intermediaries find out what we want? Investor assemblies, for us at least, are inspired by citizens' assemblies, which have been used in the political context. They're relatively large bodies of individuals, 100 or more, chosen at random, technically through stratified random sampling, from the larger population to deliberate on important social and political issues. They were popular in ancient Greece over 2,000 years ago, fell out of fashion but are now coming back. Think of large juries aimed to capture the full diversity of a population and ideally offer an accurate demographic mini-portrait of it. Members will be provided with informational resources, briefing materials, and access to experts. They will meet online and in person to discuss and deliberate, and they will make recommendations about Vanguard's voting and engagement strategy going forward. The point is, companies often defend their actions by saying they are acting on behalf of their shareholders, they're maximizing profit, but there's no reason to think that this is what shareholders want. Increasing evidence that is wrong. And investor assemblies are a way for investor voices to be heard, and I think giving investors a voice could lead to a better world. At the very least, it leads to a more democratic world.
We have seen now investor democracy in practice. We have also seen that BlackRock was one of the first to really come with pass-through voting in 2022. So I was wondering, given now you have heard Oliver, you have seen Bram's presentation. When is BlackRock going to be the first to implement shareholder democracy?
Let me first explain a bit about the differences in the roles of asset owners and asset managers in this respect, because I think it's very important that the money we manage as BlackRock, and we manage $14 trillion of that is 12 zeros. It's an incredible amount of money. I think we do that through voting choice, because the voting choice, and we can discuss the pickup in the design of voting choice. It is actually as an investor with BlackRock, so either as an institutional investor who tend to do a lot of this work themselves and have their own teams, but also as a retail investor, you have the choice to either go with our benchmark policy or choose one of the now 16 different policies that reflect your beliefs best. And you can simply choose to do so at no additional cost using our platform. And that is not a lot of work. I've tried it. It is not a lot of work. So I think we made some big steps. I had our business in the Netherlands, so I can speak to the Dutch market with more authority, I would say, than in other markets. But I think institutional investors in the Netherlands, the larger ones, they have their own teams. So they do stewardship and voting themselves, or they outsource it to specialized firms. So it is mostly retail investors in this country. And it applies to ETFs and index funds, mainly, on the equity side.
You know, I actually use a voting guideline myself. It's not one of yours. I use it. No, I think I have a better one because through Fidelity, I have a fund with them, which I asked Fidelity whether I could vote on myself on the various things I have with them, and they basically said no, except for one fund where they said I could because of the way it's structured. And of course, yes, you can't do it yourself because there's so many, you know, every day now I get 4 emails about things to vote on. I don't, but it all gets delegated to something called Iconic. Are you familiar with them? So that's, for people who don't know that, that's one where it's a personalized algorithm. They ask you a whole bunch of questions. It takes about, 40 minutes to fill out, which are meant to elicit your views on various things. And then it votes on your behalf. So as I say, I think it's a bit more flexible than the ones that BlackRock or Vanguard or State Street offer because it's personalized. However, I will say about this that I have come to the conclusion it is quite inferior to the idea of an investor assembly for 2 reasons. First of all, I noticed that, here's an interesting thing. When Elon Musk was asking for $1 trillion, I thought that was a little too much. And I assumed that the answers that I'd given would be such that the Iconic algorithm would vote against that. Well, I checked, and it had voted for. Because I happen to know the CEO of Iconic, I emailed him and said, what's going on? It was too late, by the way, because normally you can go in and reverse what they're doing, but unfortunately I'd been too slow about it. So he said, oh, well, the thing is, the criteria you listed, none of them were about executive pay, because wasn't a burning issue for me, actually. I was more interested in the environment and this kind of thing. So it turns out that, my answers to executive pay meant they went along with the board, and the board had recommended it. So I found myself, I thought, and that's not the only time that's happened. There was a second occasion was with Warner Brothers and their merger. Again, I wanted to vote against, but I was slow again, and I found the algorithm had voted for. So this is so I don't think these things are that wonderful. The second thing is, I think there's a huge benefit from deliberation, and I think we heard that from Bram, and I've heard it from Hélène, and everything I've read about citizens' assemblies, that when people meet and deliberate, it takes it to a new level. So this idea of voting choice, you just vote by yourself, according to, actually you don't, you delegate it to somebody. There's no discussion, there's no deliberation on important issues. And I think that's just something, as I say, it's a different level. So I think it'd be wonderful if you considered going all the way to deliberative shareholder democracy.
AI offers great opportunities with the technological innovations to make this much more personal. So this is something that I'm not a stewardship expert, but I will definitely bring this to the team. So I like that. And then the one where you can personalize it and then improve.
It's going to get it wrong. Some of the.
Yeah, and I think maybe the assemblies also get it wrong some of the times. And so my question is, I fully get the citizen assemblies for in a political setup. So you are an inhabitant of a country that is a democracy, and you can only leave that democracy if you move to a different country. Well, that is a costly decision in many ways. And I think in the same way, if you are a participant in a DB pension fund, at least in the Netherlands, that is mandatory. So you cannot leave for another fund. I think mutual funds or ETFs slightly different in the sense that it is very often a deliberate choice to invest in a certain fund. And I think with the broad range of funds that is available, not only from BlackRock, but from many, many others, from index to impact investing and everything in between, I think that universe or that situation is a bit different from being in a DB pension fund or living in a country. So I find the work that you've been doing conceptually very interesting, and I think that there have been several iterations which make the proposal very strong, but the question is still, how does it improve the current situation where you either go with benchmark voting, where we have, similar to others, but we happen to have a team of 60 professionals that work on this full-time. They are located all over the world, so they have deep knowledge of the companies they analyze, the industries they work in, of the local regulations. And these are really well-trained professionals. And my question is, how do you improve when you select 150, well, stratified sampling, so not fully random, but still not professional investors or analysts to do that for you?
Can I add something to that?
Yes,
quick?
please go ahead, Laura. That is great.
So one of the things about this proxy voting that we have not talked about today, and I spent a lot of time on a mutual fund board where we looked at all of these, and I've done research in this area, is some of the proposals, it can be for the same topic, but one can be nuts and the other can be logical. So I don't understand, how Iconic is taking that into account, given your preferences. Whereas if you do go with one of these package things, at least you have somebody paying attention, like ISS or Egan-Jones, they're paying attention to it. Does this make any sense, this proposal? And I don't think the Assembly would get that, because you'd have to have somebody looking at these proposals and saying, does this make sense?
I think it has, the algorithm I think is pretty good. I mean, they use AI, I don't know. I imagine they can screen for that, but I would have to check. So we agree that Iconic is more sophisticated than the ones you're using at the moment. But even the sophisticated ones, they can't anticipate when you answer the questions, the problem is things are going to happen in the future where your answers to the questions do not inform the algorithm correctly about the choice. So I gave two examples with Musk and this merger, and in both cases the algorithm got it wrong. And it would have been better if they'd come back to me and said, how do you feel about this? That's what an assembly can do, is to consider things at the time, not, way in advance. In other words, they can respond to specific circumstances. And, that's something that I think is an improvement. And there's also the deliberation. That's the thing which is completely missing from any of these voting choices. Similarly with animals, if we had a discussion about the humane treatment of animals, maybe, my view is, well, I don't have a dog, I don't have a cat, I don't really care that much about them, and human beings are more important, and the most important person is me, and I don't really care about anybody else for that matter. And then it turns out I'm speaking with you, and you have a dog, and you explain to me something about your relationship with your dog, and actually I do care. So I care about human beings, I don't care about dogs, until I hear from you about how much the dog matters to you. And I start thinking, well, maybe I've been a little too narrow on this.
And my previous point was there is such a broad range of changes or in products that you can choose from, that there is no cost or very little cost in shifting from one fund or one ETF to the other.
Well, actually, apart from capital gains taxes, but you know what? Let's look at another way. This could be a selling point for BlackRock. In other words, what you're saying is, if I don't like your fund, and because you don't offer this, I can go somewhere else once we have funds that do offer investor assemblies. I think that would be your position. And I don't disagree with that, but I ask then, why aren't you? Maybe it would be a good
I wasn't...
selling technique for you to say, you can say to people, look, we're a democratic fund.
Rafi, when you hear all of that, how do you look at it from an insurance company? So do you see there that it's difficult to implement, or would you say, no, we will start next year?
Well, I really like the idea. So when I first read the paper, I had the typical stuff going through my mind, like how do you measure this? What about these preferences? Don't they change? And then I talked to Oliver about it, and he said, well, whether the preferences change, etc. Well, let's test it, let's do it, and then we will find out. So I started thinking about it, and I really like the idea. I think it is an interesting selling point. I'm an optimist, so I'm always going to think in terms of chances, because the head of our ESG department is also here, Raquel, and I asked her, how do we know what our beneficiaries want? And we try to find this out. We want to know, and I see these assemblies as a tool to find out what our beneficiaries want. And there's different ways to get this. For example, surveys, but they have all kinds of problems, which all of us academics know. So I see it as an opportunity, definitely. There is some costs involved, of course. So I asked Bram, I said, Bram, you guys, you and Paul, you did this assembly. How much did it cost per person? And he gave me an amount, and I figured out it's about $2,000 euros per person. It's very close to what you mentioned in your paper, because I think you mentioned it's about $2,500 per person. So, I start thinking costs are not that prohibitive either. And one last thing before I talk too much. This apathy, investor apathy thing, I recognize it so much, man. I recognize it so much. We had local elections in Amsterdam not too long ago. Not in Amsterdam, in all of Netherlands. And I didn't know who to vote for, so I filled this survey in. And I have to be honest, man, like 70% of the questions I answered neutral or don't know. Because each of these questions, they require so much thought, actually. Do you want to increase the maximum maximum speed limit in a certain place? Well, it depends. How much lives do you save? How much cost does it take, etc., etc. You have to think about this.
Without more information, it's very hard to decide on that.
Yeah,
right? And if you had a deliberation where you had experts coming in that could inform you, then you could make that trade-off in a much better way.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
a citizens' assembly that would have already deliberated and told you what their conclusions were, which you can ignore, but you might well think, well, I'm going to go with that.
That brings me to Laura, because we also heard now Monique and Oliver talking about the value-values trade-off, where Oliver says, we can just not have managers, professionals make these value trade-offs. It was your presidential address with that title. How do you view that? So do you view that, like Monique is saying, no, these managers are perfectly capable of doing it, or do you more lean towards Oliver's point, like, no, it has to be the people themselves?
Well, I think there's some combination here, because you need somebody, as I said, you need somebody to read the proposals and understand what they're saying. And if the investor assembly, like each year, could go through the proposals, that would be a way of doing it. But they do change, and so, I mean, we're being very restrictive in talking just about the proxy proposals. But I think you do need to have people who know what it's about.
The way fiduciary duty is currently interpreted in the United States makes no sense to me, because a duty of loyalty surely means that you should be acting according to the preferences of the person you're acting on behalf of, as opposed to assuming those people want to maximize profit. How is that? I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me that you are a fiduciary for me. I want you to maximize this, and you say, no, I can't do that, because according to the law, I have to maximize financial return, which you don't want. By the way, if you read our paper, we also allow opt-out afterwards, after the investor assembly.
I noticed.
So
yeah.
I don't see any problem from the point of view. These are people who are willing.
And so this is not something where they do it once and ahead of time.
No,
this
they
is
do
where
it every year. So our proposal is there should be an investor assembly every year, and it will be a different one.
Following from Oliver's point, which was on that, which relates back to what you were talking about in terms of the value of deliberation, I think it's really helpful to explain why deliberative democracy is seen as a good way of doing democracy. And there are lots of different aspects to this that make it beneficial, but one which is directly relevant to this discussion is the public nature of deliberation.
Laura, for you, so do you think that companies, that it's really realistic that companies are going to take externalities more into account when we apply more shareholder democracy?
I think companies are going to pay attention to their investors. And if you have more pressure from the investors that comes from the shareholder democracy, then companies will pay attention.
Let's end with you, Oliver. So you came with this idea. So let's say we sit here again in 5 years from now. What do you hope? We are back here in the industriële grote club, and we say, okay, what have we achieved by now on investor democracy? What is your big hope where we stand then?
My great hope is that BlackRock will take it up. This would be a dream come true for me. But more generally, what I think is we are seeing some progress in Europe, and we've heard about that, and that's very encouraging. And so, the Dutch pension fund, and apparently there's another one. So it seems like pension funds might be easier to persuade than asset managers. My hope would be that in 5 years we'll see more efforts in this direction in Europe, but also some efforts in the US.
Nah, what a nice way to end. So give them another round of applause. Rafi Hayat, Laura Starks, Monique Donders, and Oliver Hart.
The panel was very interesting. I mean, it's very interesting when you have academics, including people like me, and a practitioner, Monique, from BlackRock. And we saw a little bit of disagreement there about the way forward, but on the whole, I thought the ideas I'm interested in, which is more shareholder democracy, I felt that idea had advanced a little today.
So when I first learned about investor democracy through being involved with learning about the mini public, I was very impressed. I thought it was just such a great idea. And so as a researcher, I would like to have more information about how I could get data. I would like to see them do more that I can use the data for.
My biggest takeaway is that there's just a lot of interest in this stuff. In other words, people are recognizing that the way we've been doing things or thinking about things for the last 50 years is not really the right way, and we have to move forward. Exactly how we move forward, different people have different views, but I don't think the sort of status quo is acceptable to many people. Well, because companies should be acting on behalf of their shareholders, but they're doing all sorts of things that their shareholders, if they were actually asked, do you like this? They would say no. I think we don't know because they're never asked.